Lieutenant Jessica Keller was having what professionals call a very bad day, and what she called a typical Tuesday. She stood in the Galactic Council's Grand Assembly Hall, which looked like someone had mixed a courthouse with a spaceship and forgot to add windows, wondering how exactly a clerical error had landed her here. She was a logistics officer. She moved boxes. Important boxes, sure, but still boxes. Apparently someone had misspelled her job code as liaison officer on the diplomatic manifest, and now she was representing humanity at trade negotiations with the Krix Empire because the actual diplomats were still 3 hyperspace jumps away. The Krix were insectoid, 7 feet tall, and had the personality of a wasp that found out you killed its entire family. War-Prince Tchk'var, their lead negotiator, had been clicking his mandibles aggressively for 20 minutes while making demands that basically boiled down to give us everything or we'll be mildly inconvenient. The other council members, a mix of species that looked like someone had given evolution a fever dream and an art degree, watched with the bored expressions of people who had seen this exact song and dance 600 times before. Jess was running on 4 hours of sleep, station coffee that tasted like regret, and the single granola bar she had found in her jacket pocket from 2 weeks ago. She was not in the mood. Tchk'var skittered forward, invaded her personal space by about 3 feet, and made a threat that the translator helpfully rendered as, "Your species will kneel or be crushed beneath our superiority." Jess's hand moved on pure instinct. The slap echoed through the chamber like a gunshot. Tchk'var's head snapped sideways, his mandibles clicking in a confused staccato that the translator gave up on entirely. The silence that followed could have collapsed into a black hole from sheer density. Ambassador Cleith, a gaseous being whose translation device was emanating a sound that Jess could only describe as panicked wind chimes, floated backward rapidly. The Council's arbiter, a crystalline being named Shard, who had been mediating galactic disputes since before Earth discovered fire, made a sound like grinding rocks and pulled up a holographic display. "By the Valdren Protocols," Shard announced, their voice resonating through the chamber, "physical combat has been initiated between representatives of 2 species. The aggressor species must be formally classified for threat assessment. Humanity currently holds no classification." "Wait," Jess said, raising her hand like she was in grade school. "I didn't aggress. He was in my face." "You struck a Krix royal with an unarmed appendage," Shard continued, ignoring her entirely. "This constitutes combat initiation under Protocol 7, Section 4, subsection "Oh no, someone did the thing." "That's not actually what it says," Cleith's translator protested weakly. "It's close enough," Shard replied. "Commander Vorn, please report to Assessment Bay 3. We have an unclassified species that needs immediate evaluation." Tchk'var, still holding his mandible, made a series of clicks that translated to, "This soft creature struck me. Me. I demand to know what manner of warrior race we face." Jess was about to explain that she was absolutely not a warrior and could he please calm down when a bird-like alien in military uniform swept into the chamber. Commander Vorn of the Avithen Fleet stood about 6 feet tall, had feathers that shimmered between blue and silver, and carried a data pad like it was a holy relic. His eyes, large and disturbingly intelligent, fixed on Jess with the intensity of someone who had just been handed an interesting problem. "You," he said, his beak clicking with each word, "are about to become very well documented." "I just want to go back to my hotel room," Jess replied. "Should have thought of that before you initiated first contact protocols through physical violence," Vorn said, already scanning her with a handheld device that beeped disapprovingly. "Preliminary readings are concerning. You have an internal skeleton. Why do you have all your bones on the inside? That's not even efficient." "I don't know, man. Take it up with evolution." "I will be taking it up with the Valdren Assessment Committee," Vorn replied. "You have 48 hours to be classified, or the Krix Empire has grounds to declare defensive war on your species for unprovoked assault." "Defensive war?" Jess repeated. "He literally threatened to crush us." "Words are not classified as combat under Valdren Protocols. Physical strikes are. Your species touched first." Vorn gestured with one wing toward the exit. "Please proceed to Assessment Bay 3. Bring any cultural items that provide comfort. This is going to take a while." Jess looked at Ambassador Cleith. who had somehow managed to float even further away and was now practically hiding behind a support pillar. She looked at Tchk'var, who was clicking something that sounded smug. She looked at Vorn, who was already updating his datapad with the efficiency of someone who did this for a living. "Can I at least get more coffee first?" she asked. "No," Vorn said. "Stimulants will skew the results. Now move along. We have a deadline, and I have a reputation for thoroughness." As Jess followed him out of the council chamber, she heard Tchk'var announce loudly, "The Krix Empire will await the classification results with great interest. Surely this weak soft species will register as negligible threat." Jess turned back just long enough to smile at him. It was not a friendly smile. It was the smile of someone who had been awake since 0400 hours, had eaten nothing but a stale granola bar, and had just been told she was about to be poked and prodded for 2 days straight. Tchk'var's mandibles stopped clicking entirely. Somewhere deep in his insectoid brain, a survival instinct that had kept the Krix alive for 10,000 years whispered a single word. Run. Assessment Bay. 3 looked like a gym had a baby with a medical facility, and then abandoned it in a spaceship. Equipment that Jess couldn't identify lined the walls. Holographic displays flickered with data she couldn't read, and in the center sat what appeared to be a very angry treadmill that had ambitions of being a torture device. Commander Vorn circled her like a predatory bird who had found a particularly interesting bug, his scanner beeping with increasing concern. Bone density is registering at levels typically found in species that regularly fight for territorial dominance. Do humans engage in frequent combat? I mean, we have martial arts classes at the gym, Jess offered. Does that count? Your species voluntarily trains for combat during recreational periods. Vorn's feathers ruffled. That's concerning. Moving on. Muscle fiber composition shows fast twitch and slow twitch fibers in equal distribution. That's unusual. Most species optimize for either burst speed or endurance. We like to keep our options open. Your cardiovascular system has redundant pathways and an efficiency rating that suggests sustained pursuit capability. Are you a pursuit predator species? Just thought about how to answer that. Well, we used to chase prey until it got too tired to run anymore. But that was like thousands of years ago. Now we mostly use that ability to catch buses. Vorn stopped walking and stared at her. You're telling me humans evolved as persistence hunters, marathon runners, the kind of species that doesn't stop until the prey literally collapses from exhaustion. Yeah, but we don't really do that anymore. We have grocery stores. But you still can. Vorn made a note on his datapad with more force than strictly necessary. Excellent. Wonderful. That's not going to complicate my report at all. The first test involved a combat drone about the size of a large dog, painted in what Jess assumed was meant to be intimidating red. It had articulated arms, some kind of weapon systems that were definitely not armed with anything lethal, but looked like they'd hurt, and moved with the kind of precision that said, military-grade equipment. Standard reaction assessment, Vorn announced from behind a protective barrier. The drone will engage in simulated combat. You will defend yourself using any means available. Your response time, tactical thinking, and threat recognition will be evaluated. Any means available? Jess looked around the assessment bay. There wasn't much. Some equipment racks, a few storage containers, a folding chair near the observation window. Within reason, Vorn clarified. Begin. The drone activated with a whir that sounded almost happy. It circled Jess twice, probably scanning for weaknesses, then lunged forward with its manipulator arms extended. Jess had been poked, prodded, scanned, and questioned for 3 hours straight. She was tired, she was hungry, and she had reached what her commanding officer back on Earth called her "I'm done being polite" threshold. She grabbed the folding chair. What followed was 3 minutes of what the assessment computer would later classify as improvised weapon utilization with extreme prejudice. Jess used the chair like it owed her money, blocking the drone's strikes, hooking its arms, and eventually wedging the chair's legs into its articulation joints until the machine made a sad grinding noise and toppled over. The combat drone, designed to assess threats across multiple species and tested against Krix warriors, lay on its side, making the mechanical equivalent of confused whimpering sounds. Vorn stared at his datapad. then at Jess, then back at his datapad. You weaponized furniture. It looked sturdy, Jess said, slightly out of breath. Also, is this test almost done? Because I really need to eat something. You turned a sitting device into a melee weapon and defeated military hardware. I mean, it's just a chair. People hit each other with chairs all the time. Have you seen professional wrestling? Vorn made a series of notes that involved a lot of what Jess assumed were alien swear words. Perhaps you're an outlier, an unusually aggressive specimen. We'll need a baseline comparison. A what now? 20 minutes later, they brought in Marcus Chen from Earth's accounting department. Marcus was 42, wore glasses he didn't technically need, but thought made him look distinguished, and had never been in a fight in his entire life. He was scared of geese. His idea of extreme exercise was taking the stairs instead of the elevator. Hi, Jess, Marcus said weakly, staring at the reassembled combat drone. Why am I here? They said something about threat assessment, and I thought it was a tax audit. They want to see how normal humans react to combat situations, Jess explained. I'm going to die, Marcus said with absolute certainty. You're not going to die, Marcus. It's just a drone. The test began. The drone activated and moved toward Marcus with the same predatory efficiency it had shown with Jess. Marcus ran and kept running. The assessment bay was large, designed for testing various combat scenarios, with obstacles and barriers placed strategically throughout. Marcus navigated them all at a steady, panicked jog, his breathing labored but consistent. The drone pursued. Marcus kept running. His face turned red. His breathing became more desperate, but his legs kept moving. 15 minutes in, Vorn checked his datapad. This is unusual. 20 minutes in, Marcus was still running, still screaming occasionally, but showing no signs of stopping. 30 minutes in, the drone's battery warning light started blinking. 45 minutes in, the drone stopped. Just stopped. Its power cell completely drained. It settled to the ground with what sounded like electronic exhaustion. Marcus kept running for another 2 minutes before he realized the drone wasn't chasing him anymore. He stopped, hands on knees, gasping for air, but very much still conscious and mobile. Did I win? He wheezed. Vorn's feathers had puffed out in what Jess was learning to recognize as distress. You outlasted military hardware through pure endurance. How? How is this possible? Your species is made of soft tissue and poor decisions. I do marathons, Marcus gasped. It helps with stress from tax season. You run marathons recreationally? Vorn's beak clicked rapidly. For stress relief? Well, yeah, it's relaxing once you get past the first 10 miles. Vorn turned to Jess. Your species engages in endurance running until you experience euphoria. You've weaponized exercise into a leisure activity. This is not normal. This is not okay. I mean, some people do ultramarathons, Jess offered helpfully, like 50, 100-mile runs through deserts and mountains, for fun. The commander opened his beak, closed it, opened it again, finally managed. I need to add a new category to the Valdren database, persistence predator, classification extreme. This explains nothing and makes everything worse. Ambassador Cleeth's voice crackled through the bay's communication system. Commander Vorn, perhaps we've assessed enough. The data clearly shows humans are just unusually tenacious. We can classify them as moderate threat and move on. No, Vorn said flatly. Tenacious doesn't cover this. Tenacious is holding your ground. This is hunting prey until it dies from being chased. I need to run full combat protocols. That seems excessive, Cleeth protested. Cleeth, this human female defeated a combat drone with furniture, and this human male ran until military equipment gave up. I'm not stopping until I understand what we're dealing with. Jess raised her hand again. Quick question. Can someone please get us food? Marcus looks like he's going to pass out, and I've been here for 4 hours. After the next assessment, Vorn replied, already pulling up new protocols on his datapad. Jess and Marcus exchanged looks. His said, I want to go home. Hers said, I'm going to eat that bird. Vorn, reading his datapad, missed both expressions entirely, which was probably for the best. The Galactic Council had decided that if they were going to classify humanity, they needed to do it properly, which meant instead of Assessment Bay 3, Jess now stood in the grand combat arena, a space designed for species to prove their martial prowess in controlled conditions. The arena floor was roughly the size of a basketball court, surrounded by energy barriers and observation platforms where council members gathered like spectators at the world's weirdest sporting event. Across from Jess stood Ssk'ral, a Krix warrior who made War-Prince Tchk'var look small. 7 feet of chitin armor, blade-like appendages that could probably cut through steel, and a set of mandibles that clicked with the confidence of someone who had won 63 combat assessments and never lost a single one. Commander Vorn stood at the arena's edge, his datapad clutched like a security blanket. Standard combat assessment. Ssk'ral represents the Krix Empire's military capabilities. Defeat him, and humanity's threat classification rises significantly. Lose and well. He gestured vaguely. Earth's negotiating position becomes very uncomfortable. Can I have a weapon? Jess asked. Since we're doing this properly. Absolutely not. This is an unarmed threat assessment. You struck War-Prince Tchk'var with your bare appendage. We're evaluating what an unarmed human is capable of. Okay, so just to be clear, you want me to fight the 7-foot murder bug with my bare hands. Technically, you initiated this by fighting the 7-foot, as you say, murder bug with your bare hands originally. That was a slap. This is different. Not according to Valdren Protocols. Vorn checked his datapad. Although I will note your protest in the official record under human objections that make unfortunate sense. Jess looked up at the observation platforms. War-Prince Tchk'var was there, clicking his mandibles in what the translator rendered as anticipatory satisfaction. Ambassador Cleith hovered nearby, their gaseous form vibrating with what was probably anxiety. Other council members watched with expressions ranging from curiosity to concern to one species that appeared to be selling concessions. "Can I at least have breakfast first?" Jess asked. "It's been 6 hours. I'm running on fumes here." There was a brief conference. Someone produced a protein bar from the station commissary. Jess read the ingredients label, made a face that transcended language barriers, and shoved it in her pocket. "I'll save this for later. Or maybe never." "The human refuses sustenance before combat," one observer noted. "Is this a ritual?" "No, it's a complaint," Jess muttered. "Big difference." Ssk'ral clacked his blades together in what was probably meant to be intimidating. The translator provided, "I have fought in 60 campaigns across 14 worlds. You are soft flesh with no natural weapons. This will be brief." "You know what?" Jess rolled her shoulders, feeling vertebrae pop in a way that made several observers flinch. "I've had a really long day. Let's get this over with." The arena's starting tone chimed. Ssk'ral charged immediately, blades extended, moving with the kind of speed that came from a lifetime of killing things efficiently. Jess did something that no opponent had ever done to Ssk'ral before. She didn't block. She didn't dodge sideways. She went down and forward, dropping under his blade strike and hooking her leg behind his in one smooth motion that her brother had taught her when she was 12 years old, and he was showing off wrestling moves in the backyard. Physics and momentum did the rest. Ssk'ral, moving at full charge, found his leg hooked and his center of balance catastrophically compromised. He hit the arena floor with a crash that echoed through the chamber. Before he could recover, Jess was on him, one arm wrapped around what she really hoped was his equivalent of a neck, the other controlling one of his blade arms with a grip that her combat instructor would have called technically proficient if aggressive. "Tap out," she said. Ssk'ral made a clicking sound that didn't translate. "Tap out." Jess adjusted her hold. Something in his shoulder joint made a grinding noise. Ssk'ral's free blade arm slapped the ground twice, the universal signal for, "I give up, please stop." Jess released him immediately and stood up, breathing hard but still standing. "You okay? Sorry about the shoulder thing. I didn't mean to crank it that hard." Ssk'ral lay on the arena floor, staring at the ceiling, his mandibles moving in what might have been shock or possibly prayer. When he finally spoke, the translator rendered it as, "What manner of demon creature are you?" "I'm a logistics officer who really needs coffee and a sandwich." "You dismantled a Krix warrior with no weapons." Ssk'ral slowly got to his feet, cradling his shoulder joint. You used my own body against me. This is not normal soft flesh behavior. It's called leverage, Jess explained. You were moving fast. I just borrowed your momentum. Basic grappling. From the observation platform, War-Prince Tchk'var stood abruptly. His translator clicked rapidly. The Krix Empire would like to formally reconsider our earlier territorial demands regarding human space. Perhaps we were hasty. Perhaps trade negotiations could resume on more equitable terms. You're backing down? Arbiter Shard's crystalline voice held notes of surprise. The Krix never back down. The Krix have never faced a species that weaponizes physics and apologizes while doing it, Tchk'var replied. This is concerning behavior. We would prefer to be trade partners rather than discover what else humans are capable of when properly motivated. Ambassador Cleith floated forward. Commander Vorn, surely we have enough data now. The human defeated a Krix warrior in single combat. We can classify them as a moderate martial threat and conclude this assessment. Vorn was staring at his datapad like it had personally betrayed him. No, this is worse than that. She didn't overpower him. She used technique, strategy. That implies training. Systematic combat knowledge. If this is a standard human capability, I need to understand the full scope. The full scope. Jess really didn't like how he said that. How many humans have combat training of this level? Jess thought about every military branch, every martial arts gym, every wrestling team, every self-defense class on Earth. I mean, millions? Tens of millions if you count people who took like a few months of classes. More if you count people who just casually scrap. Casually scrap, Vorn repeated faintly. Yeah, you know, bar fights, sibling roughhousing, that kind of thing. Your species has millions of combat-trained individuals and engages in violence recreationally between family units. Well, when you say it like that, it sounds bad. Vorn's feathers had gone completely flat against his body. I need to run psychological warfare assessments. I need to understand human threat responses under stress. I need to catalog this properly before I submit my report. Can I please eat something first? Jess asked. Seriously, I'm going to get cranky. You're not cranky now? Ssk'ral asked from where he was still testing his shoulder joint. Oh no, this is me being pleasant. You really don't want to see me cranky? The Krix warrior's mandibles clicked rapidly. War-Prince Tchk'var, I formally recommend we upgrade our trade offer to anything humans want. They can have it. Noted, Tchk'var replied. Arbiter Shard, the Krix Empire withdraws all territorial complaints and combat classifications regarding humanity. We're good. We're fine. Let's all just be friends. We still need an official classification, Shard said. Commander Vorn, proceed with your assessment. Vorn looked at Jess, who was trying to stretch out her shoulder and looked about 5 seconds from actually getting cranky. He looked at his datapad, which was now displaying error messages because the Valdren database couldn't process what it had just witnessed. Fine, he said. But first, someone get her food. I don't want to find out what happens when humans get hungry. Smart bird, Jess muttered. Vorn pretended not to hear her, mostly because he agreed. The station cafeteria, called the Nebula Commons because apparently someone in station management thought space cafeterias needed branding, was a long space filled with food dispensers designed to accommodate 73 different species with varying biochemistries. Jess stood in front of a terminal, scrolling through options that ranged from nutritionally adequate to possibly sentient. She eventually found something labeled as compatible with carbon-based life forms, Earth origin acceptable, which turned out to be a sandwich that looked like it was trying very hard to be normal and only partially succeeding. She also acquired coffee from a dispenser that seemed confused by the request, but eventually produced a liquid that was dark, hot, and probably wouldn't kill her. 20 minutes later, Jess returned to Assessment Bay 3, where Commander Vorn had set up what appeared to be a mobile panic station. Multiple data pads were scattered across a desk. Holographic displays showed classification trees that kept branching off into error states, and Vorn himself looked like a bird who had seen the face of the divine and found it deeply unsettling. Problem? Jess asked, sipping her coffee. Vorn's head snapped up. Put that down. Put that down right now. It's just coffee. That is a Class 4 stimulant that would put most species into cardiac arrest. You're drinking it casually. It's actually pretty weak coffee by Earth standards. This is like office break room quality. Vorn made a note on the nearest datapad with the kind of intensity usually reserved for documenting war crimes. Humans consume Class 4 stimulants recreationally. Excellent. That's going in the report under Concerning Biochemical Practices. Jess took another sip. What about the sandwich? What about it? She held it up. Vorn scanned it with a handheld device. The device immediately started beeping an alarm. That contains fermented milk solids, processed capsaicin compounds, and preserved plant matter that's been chemically altered for flavor enhancement. You're eating processed chemical compounds. It's just cheese, peppers, and pickles, my guy. You say that like it makes it better. Vorn's feathers ruffled. What else do humans consume regularly? I mean, depends on the culture, but generally, bread, meat, vegetables, fruits, dairy products. Some people are really into spicy food. Oh, and chocolate. What's chocolate? It comes from a plant that's toxic to most Earth animals, but we figured out how to process it into candy. It's delicious. Vorn stared at her. You consume biological toxins for pleasure. I mean, when you phrase it that way. How else would I phrase it? What else? What other casual poisons do humans ingest? Jess thought about it. Alcohol, I guess. That's literally poison that makes you feel funny. Some people drink a lot of it. We have whole industries around it. You have industries dedicated to distributing recreational poison. Technically, yes. Ambassador Cleith's voice crackled through the Bay's communication system, their translator emanating sounds of deep concern. Commander Vorn, are we really diverting the assessment to discuss human dietary choices? Cleith, they drink cardiac stimulants, eat processed toxins, and have industries dedicated to intoxication substances. This is absolutely relevant to threat assessment. How? How is this relevant? Because it means their biology is absurdly resilient. They're not surviving despite their environment. They're thriving on things that should hospitalize them. Vorn pulled up a new display. Every classification category in the Valdren Protocols assumes species have natural advantages. Armored hides, venom, claws, psionic abilities, environmental specialization. Humans have none of these. Right, Jess said. We're kind of squishy and slow by galactic standards. But you're terrifying anyway. Vorn continued, his voice rising. You have no natural weapons, so you turn everything into weapons. You have no environmental advantages, so you adapt to every environment. You're not particularly fast, so you just don't stop moving. Ever. You're not especially strong, so you use leverage and technique. You're not resistant to toxins, so you just eat them until your body figures it out. I feel like you're working yourself up to something here. Vorn gestured at his displays, where classification attempts kept branching into error states. The Valdren database can't process you. Every time I enter human capabilities, the system crashes. Because humans don't fight like anything in the database. You don't fit any category. You're not apex predators. You're not ambush specialists. You're not pack hunters or lone stalkers or siege warriors. You're just persistent and creative and apparently unkillable through normal means. We die pretty easily, actually, Jess pointed out. We're fragile. You're fragile, but you weaponized endurance. You're weak, but you systematized combat training. You have no natural defenses, but you're drinking cardiac stimulants for fun. That's not fragility. That's spite. Vorn sat down heavily, his feathers settling into what Jess was learning to recognize as exhaustion. I have one more assessment to run. Psychological warfare resistance. It's standard protocol for species classification. We put you in isolation with hostile audio stimuli and see how long you last before psychological breakdown. Most species tap out within 30 minutes. Jess finished her coffee. I used to work in customer service. Try me. 30 minutes later, Jess sat in an isolation chamber designed to create psychological stress through audio manipulation. Discordant sounds echoed through the space. Frequency patterns designed to trigger discomfort in multiple species. Rhythms meant to disrupt normal thought processes. Jess lasted 15 minutes before she got bored and started singing. She didn't have a particularly good voice. Actually, she had what her friends generously called an enthusiastic voice, and what her brother called a war crime against music. But she was trapped in a box with nothing to do, and if they were going to play annoying sounds, she was going to respond in kind. She started with classic rock, moved through pop hits from the 2090s, and eventually settled on show tunes because those always annoyed her brother, and maybe they'd annoy the test administrators too. In the observation room, the monitoring staff were experiencing what would later be described in official reports as acute psychological distress induced by human vocalization patterns. "Make it stop," one technician pleaded. "She's supposed to be the one breaking down," another said, their species equivalent of hands over their ears. "She's singing. Why is she singing? That's not how this test works." Commander Vorn watched the audio analysis displays, which showed that Jess was somehow matching the hostile frequencies and creating interference patterns. "She's counteracting the psychological warfare protocol with recreational vocalization. She weaponized music. Badly. Can we turn it off?" the first technician asked. "If we turn it off, she wins. I'm filing a formal complaint. This violates the station's noise ordinance." Jess, oblivious to the chaos she was causing, transitioned into what she remembered of a musical her niece had been obsessed with. She was pretty sure she was getting the lyrics wrong, but honestly, who cared at this point? 5 minutes later, the test was terminated. Not because Jess broke down, because the monitoring staff evacuated the observation room. When Vorn opened the isolation chamber, Jess blinked at the light. "Oh, are we done?" That was actually kind of relaxing. The acoustics in there are pretty good. Vorn's feathers were completely inverted. "You terrorized my staff with singing." "They were playing weird noises at me. I was just passing the time." "You pass the time by creating audio that registers as hostile on 17 different species' psychological profiles." "I can't sing that badly." "Lieutenant Keller, you made a Vrexian cry. Their species communicates through harmonic resonance. You're an actual war crime." Jess opened her mouth, closed it. "I'm going to choose to take that as a compliment." "It's not a compliment. Nothing about this is a compliment. I need to submit my report." Vorn clutched his datapad. "I have no idea what to tell the Galactic Council. Humans don't fit any classification. You're individually unimpressive by most metrics, but collectively terrifying. You're fragile but unstoppable. You're weak, but you compensate with spite and furniture. And you sing. Most species sing. Not as psychological warfare, they don't." Again, taking that as a compliment. Vorn made a sound that his translator couldn't process. "The council convenes in 2 hours. I need to have a classification ready. Something that won't crash the database or trigger defense packs or make the Krix declare war out of sheer terror." "So what are you going to tell them?" "I have absolutely no idea," Vorn admitted. "But I need to figure out something before the galaxy learns that humans are apparently the universe's way of saying, what if we made a species that just refuses to lose?" Jess patted him on the shoulder. He flinched. "You'll figure it out. You seem competent." "I was competent," Vorn replied sadly. "Then I met humanity." The Galactic Council's emergency session chamber was packed. Not just the regular council members, but military observers, diplomatic staff, and what appeared to be several news drones broadcasting to various homeworlds. Word had spread about the human situation, and apparently everyone wanted to see how this would resolve. Jess sat in what was generously called the witness platform, but was really just a slightly elevated chair with a spotlight on it. She'd managed to acquire more coffee, which had caused a brief security incident until Commander Vorn wearily vouched that, yes, humans needed regular doses of Class 4 stimulants to maintain baseline function. No, he wasn't joking. Yes, it was concerning. Vorn stood at the primary podium, surrounded by holographic displays showing his assessment data. He looked like someone who had spent the last 8 hours watching their entire understanding of galactic combat doctrine fall apart and then set itself on fire. "Honored council members," he began, his voice carrying the exhaustion of a bird who had seen too much. "I have completed the threat assessment of humanity, species classification pending, initiated after the diplomatic incident involving physical combat between Lieutenant Jessica Keller and War-Prince Tchk'var." Tchk'var, sitting in the Krix delegation area, clicked his mandibles in what might have been embarrassment. The Krix Empire has moved past this incident and wishes to focus on profitable trade relationships. The assessment was already initiated under Valdren Protocols. Arbiter Shard intoned. Commander Vorn, present your findings. Vorn pulled up the first display. Lieutenant Keller successfully defeated a standard combat drone using improvised weaponry, specifically furniture. She then defeated Ssk'ral, a decorated Krix warrior with 63 combat victories, using technique and leverage with no weapons. She resisted psychological warfare protocols by generating counter-audio that caused psychological distress in monitoring staff. So she's a trained warrior, one council member suggested. Classify as martial specialist and move on. She's a logistics officer, Vorn replied flatly. Her primary function is moving supplies. She took basic combat training 12 years ago and hasn't used it since. This is not a specialist. This is baseline human capability with minimal maintenance. The chamber went quiet. Ambassador Cleith's gaseous form rippled with what was probably concern. Commander, are you saying all humans are capable of this? I'm saying that the second human I tested, Marcus Chen from accounting, outlasted military hardware through pure endurance running. When I asked how this was possible, he said it was relaxing. Humans run until they experience euphoria. They've weaponized exercise into leisure activity. That's not combat capability, another council member protested. It's worse than combat capability, Vorn replied. Combat capability I can classify. I can say this species has natural weapons rating X, threat level Y, and file it in the database. Humans don't have natural weapons. They have improvisation, endurance, and what I can only describe as weaponized stubbornness. He pulled up another display showing the classification attempts. Every category in the Valdren Protocols assumes natural advantages. The database can't process a species that has no advantages, but compensates with creativity and spite. I've tried 7 different classifications. All of them crash the system. Then create a new classification, Shard suggested. I did. Multiple times. They all require subcategories that break the database structure. Vorn's feathers were doing something complicated that suggested deep frustration. Humans are context-dependent. Give them preparation time, they're terrifying. Give them motivation, they're unstoppable. Give them office supplies, they're armed. How do I classify that? War-Prince Tchk'var stood up. If I may address the council. The Krix Empire has extensive combat experience across the galaxy. We have faced apex predators, hive minds, species with natural weapons that can pierce armor. We understand warfare. And, Shard prompted, and we formally recommend that humanity be classified as extremely dangerous, and that all member species approach diplomatic relations with maximum respect and generous trade terms. They're that powerful? No, Tchk'var said. They're that persistent. Power we can fight. Persistence just exhausts you until you give up. The Krix do not wish to discover what happens when humans decide we are a problem worth solving. Another council member, a crystalline being from the Resonance Collective, chimed in. Commander Vorn, in your professional assessment, what makes humans dangerous? Vorn looked at his datapad, then at Jess, who was sipping her coffee and watching the proceedings with the patience of someone who had sat through many boring meetings. They're creative, they're adaptable, and they don't know when to quit. That's not a natural weapon. That's a survival strategy that apparently works across any context. But surely there must be a classification, the collective representative insisted. Fine. You want classification? Vorn pulled up a new display. Humans register as negligible in natural weapons, below average in speed and strength compared to galactic norms, average intelligence, moderate tool use capability. By every standard metric, they should be a non-threat species. Then classify them as such. Except they defeated our combat assessment protocols, consume recreational toxins that would hospitalize most species, and when placed under psychological stress, they sing. Badly. As a weapon. Vorn's voice was rising. The classification system doesn't account for species that are weak but refuse to acknowledge it. Arbiter Shard's crystalline form resonated with what might have been amusement. Commander Vorn, we need a classification for the record. What do you recommend? Vorn stared at his datapad for a long moment. Bring Lieutenant Keller to the podium. Jess stood up, coffee in hand, and walked to the witness platform. Every eye, sensor, and optical organ in the chamber tracked her movement. "Lieutenant Keller," Vorn said formally, "please explain to the Council, in your own words, human combat doctrine." "I'm a logistics officer," Jess protested. "I don't do combat doctrine. That's not my job. Just explain how humans approach conflict." Jess thought about it, sipping her coffee while the entire Galactic Council waited. "Okay, so here's the thing. Humans are pretty average at most stuff, right? We're not the strongest or fastest or smartest, but we're really good at two things: being stubborn and making friends." "Making friends?" War-Prince Tchk'var's mandibles clicked in confusion. "Yeah, we pack bond with anything. You want to know what makes humans dangerous? We looked at wolves, which are literally apex predators that hunt in coordinated packs, and we said, I'm going to make that thing love me. And we did it. We turned wolves into dogs. Thousands of years of just being persistent and offering snacks until the scariest land predator on our planet decided we were family." The council chamber was absolutely silent. "We didn't do it with strength," Jess continued. "We didn't do it with natural weapons or superior intelligence. We did it with persistence and pattern recognition and the absolute refusal to give up on something we decided was important. That's human combat doctrine. We're exhausting. For our enemies, for our problems, for anything that gets in our way. We just don't quit." "But that's not a combat strategy," someone protested weakly. "It's the only strategy that matters," Jess replied. "You can beat humans in any single encounter. We're fragile, we tire, we make mistakes. But we remember, we adapt, we try again, and eventually we figure it out. That's not a weapon. That's just how we exist." She took another sip of coffee. "Also, we're creative. If you take away our weapons, we'll use furniture. If you take away furniture, we'll use rocks. If you take away rocks, we'll use physics and harsh language. We're really good at improvising." "This is not helping the classification problem," Vorn muttered. "You asked," Jess replied. "I'm just telling you the truth. Humans are dangerous because we decide to be dangerous, and we're peaceful because we decide to be peaceful. You can't classify that because it changes based on context, motivation, and whether we've had coffee." War-Prince Tchk'var stood again. "The Krix Empire moves that humanity be classified as Apex Threat Level 7, and that all diplomatic encounters include proper refreshments and respect for personal boundaries." "That's absurdly high," another council member protested. "Level 7 is reserved for species that can crack planets." "The Krix have fought planet crackers," Tchk'var replied. "They're terrifying but predictable. Humans are terrifying because they're not. I defer to Commander Vorn's expertise, but the Krix position is clear. We would prefer humans as friends." Ambassador Cleith floated forward. "Perhaps we're overcomplicating this. Commander Vorn, what if we classify humans as context-dependent threat? It's accurate and doesn't crash the database." "It's accurate but meaningless," Vorn replied. "Every species is context-dependent to some degree." "Then add a note," Shard suggested. "Something that warns future assessors without triggering defense packs." Vorn looked at Jess, who shrugged. He looked at his datapad, which was still showing error messages. He looked at the assembled council, which was waiting for a decision that would affect humanity's place in the galaxy. "Fine," he said finally. "Battlefield variable, classification, context-dependent, threat level, don't." "Don't," Cleith repeated. "Don't," Vorn confirmed. "Don't start fights with them. Don't assume they're weak because they look soft. Don't underestimate their ability to improvise. Don't test their patience. Just don't." "That's not a proper threat classification," the collective representative protested. "It's the only classification that fits," Vorn replied. "Humans are individually unimpressive by most metrics, but their threat assessment depends entirely on context, motivation, and access to random objects. The classification is battlefield variable, because that's what they are. Variables, unpredictable, adaptable, and persistently problematic." Arbiter Shard's crystalline form glowed softly. "The Council will vote. All in favor of classifying humanity as battlefield variable, context-dependent, threat-level advisory, exercise diplomatic caution." Hands, appendages, energy fields, and various other voting mechanisms rose throughout the chamber. The vote was nearly unanimous. Only 2 species abstained, and they later admitted it was because they didn't understand the category but figured everyone else probably knew what they were doing. "The motion carries," Shard announced. "Humanity is officially classified. Lieutenant Keller, you're free to go. The diplomatic incident is considered resolved." Jess raised her hand. "Quick question. Does this mean Earth gets the trade agreements we wanted?" There was a brief, uncomfortable silence. "Yes," Tchk'var said quickly. "Whatever Earth wants, favorable terms, we'll send the contracts immediately." "And the Krix territorial demands?" Shard asked pointedly. "Withdrawn, completely withdrawn. The Kree Empire would like to establish cultural exchange programs with humanity, starting immediately, before humans decide to pact bond with us through sheer persistence." Jess grinned. "See? Everything worked out." "Lieutenant Keller," Vorn said tiredly, "you nearly started an interstellar war by slapping a royal, defeated our combat assessment protocols, and traumatized my staff with singing. Nothing about this worked out normally." "But it worked out," Jess replied. "That's what humans do. We figure it out eventually." "Battlefield variable," Vorn muttered, updating his final report. "Context dependent. Threat level. Don't. And may whatever gods are listening help us all." 3 days after the classification hearing, Commander Vorn submitted his final report to the Galactic Archives. It was 1,700 pages long, included vid footage of every assessment, and crashed the archival system twice before they figured out how to process it. The classification of battlefield variable created an entirely new category in the Valdren Protocols, complete with warning labels and a strongly worded recommendation that diplomatic solutions should be pursued with maximum effort before field testing human capabilities. The report's final page contained a personal note from Vorn that would eventually become required reading for all diplomatic officers. "Recommend all future human interactions include adequate food, regular access to stimulants they call coffee, and respect for personal space. Classification remains battlefield variable. Threat level. Don't. Seriously, just don't." Jess, meanwhile, was finally cleared to leave Assessment Bay 3 and return to her actual job. She'd been formally commended for extraordinary patience under assessment conditions, given a diplomatic citation that she planned to frame ironically, and issued a lifetime ban from the Nebula Commons cafeteria. Apparently, the sandwich incident was still under investigation by Station Health and Safety, and 3 species had filed complaints about humans eating biohazard materials in public spaces. She was packing her minimal belongings when Ssk'ral appeared at the bay entrance. The Krix warrior looked significantly less confident than he had in the combat arena, his mandibles clicking in what the translator rendered as respectful caution. "Lieutenant Keller," he said formally, "I came to request knowledge." "Knowledge about what?" "Your combat techniques. The Krix Empire wishes to understand human fighting methods. You defeated me using leverage and technique I have never encountered. You turned my strength against me." His mandibles clicked thoughtfully. "You also apologized while doing it, which was deeply confusing. You want me to teach you how to fight like a human?" "The War-Prince has authorized cultural exchange programs. I have been assigned to learn human combat doctrine." Ssk'ral shifted his weight. "I am told you are not even a combat specialist, that these are basic skills for your species." Jess thought about it. About humanity's long, complicated history with martial arts. About every gym, every dojo, every wrestling mat and boxing ring. About the fact that humans had systematized violence into art forms and taught them to anyone willing to learn. "Okay," she said finally. "But we're not starting with combat techniques." We're not. "Nope. First you need to learn how to stretch properly, flexibility and conditioning. Can't learn grappling if you're going to hurt yourself." "This is a combat technique?" "This is injury prevention, which is the first rule of human combat training. Do not hurt yourself before the fight even starts." Jess grabbed her bag. "Also, you're going to need to learn about warm-ups, cool-downs, and why hydration matters. Safety first." Ssk'ral's mandibles clicked in what might have been confusion. "The Krix do not understand. You are teaching me about safety before teaching me about violence? That's how humans do it." We systematized combat into a teachable skill, which means we also systematized all the boring stuff that keeps you alive while you're learning. You want to fight like a human? First, you learn to train like a human. This seems inefficient. This seems like not dying in your first sparring session, Jess replied. Trust me, you do not want to learn the hard way why stretching matters. They walked toward the station's public areas, Ssk'ral clicking thoughtfully. Lieutenant Keller, may I ask a question? Sure. When you defeated me, you could have caused permanent damage to my joints. I was helpless. But you stopped as soon as I surrendered, and you apologized. Why? Jess shrugged. Because you weren't actually trying to kill me. It was an assessment. You were just doing your job. Why would I hurt you more than necessary? But I am Krix. We were enemies. We were opponents in a test. That's different. Enemies are people who actually want to hurt you. You were just trying to prove a point. She paused. Also, you seemed like a decent guy who got stuck in an awkward situation. Why would I be a jerk about it? Ssk'ral was quiet for a moment. The Krix Empire understands now why the War-Prince wishes to establish friendly relations with humanity. You are dangerous but not cruel. This is unusual in powerful species. We're not that powerful, Jess protested. You defeated me in seconds. You outlasted our combat drones. You terrorized assessment staff with recreational vocalization. Okay, the singing thing was not intentional, but you did it anyway, because humans respond to stress with creativity rather than submission or aggression. This is why you are classified as battlefield variables. You are unpredictable but not necessarily hostile. Ssk'ral's mandibles clicked in what might have been approval. The Krix can respect this. They reached the station's main concourse where the diplomatic mission was gathering for departure. Ambassador Cleith floated over, their translation device emanating sounds of relief. Lieutenant Keller, I'm so glad this is resolved. I was concerned we might have an interstellar incident. We did have an interstellar incident, Jess pointed out. That was the whole thing. Yes, but it's resolved now, peacefully, with favorable outcomes for Earth. Cleith's gaseous form rippled happily. The trade agreements are being finalized as we speak. Very generous terms. The Krix were remarkably accommodating. From across the concourse, War-Prince Tchk'var noticed them and immediately changed direction, his mandibles clicking in what the translator provided as diplomatic enthusiasm with underlying caution. Lieutenant Keller, he said formally, the Krix Empire wishes to extend formal apologies for our earlier territorial demands and for my invasion of your personal space that initiated this incident. We're good, Jess replied. No hard feelings. No hard feelings, Tchk'var repeated carefully. This is a human expression meaning forgiveness? Pretty much. The Krix accept this graciously. We also wish to present you with a gift as token of our desire for peaceful relations. He gestured, and another Krix warrior approached carrying a container that looked ceremonial and probably expensive. You didn't have to do that, Jess said. We did. Krix honor requires it. Also, Commander Vorn strongly suggested that keeping humans happy was in everyone's best interest. Tchk'var presented the container. These are Krix royal spice crystals, extremely valuable, used in our most important ceremonies. Please accept them as a symbol of friendship. Jess opened the container. The crystals inside were beautiful, shimmering with multiple colors. These are gorgeous. Thank you. You are welcome. Please use them to prepare human food. We understand you value interesting flavors. I will absolutely use these. Jess carefully closed the container. And hey, if you ever need anything, let Earth know. We're pretty good at solving problems. By being persistent and creative until the problem stops being a problem, Tchk'var asked. Exactly. The Krix will remember this. Tchk'var bowed formally, then paused. Lieutenant Keller, one final question. The assessment classified your species as battlefield variable. Does this concern you? Not really, Jess replied. It's pretty accurate. We are kind of unpredictable. And the threat level designation of don't? Also accurate. People should definitely think twice before starting fights with humans. We're annoying to fight because we don't know when to quit. Tchk'var's mandibles clicked in what was unmistakably approval. The Krix understand this philosophy. We look forward to future diplomatic relations where no one starts any fights. Sounds good to me. As Tchk'var departed, Commander Vorn approached with his ever-present datapad. He looked less exhausted than he had during the assessment, but his feathers still carried the ruffled appearance of someone who'd had their worldview thoroughly disrupted. "Lieutenant Keller," he said formally, "I wanted to inform you that your classification has been officially logged in the Galactic Archives. Humanity is now recognized as a diplomatic species with full council privileges. That's good news. It's complicated news. Every diplomatic officer in the galaxy is now required to read my report before engaging with human representatives. You've made my assessment into mandatory training material. Sorry about that. Don't be. It's possibly the most important assessment I'll ever complete." Vorn's beak clicked thoughtfully. "Lieutenant, may I ask you something off the record?" "Sure." "When you slapped War-Prince Tchk'var, starting this entire incident, did you know it would lead to all of this?" Jess laughed. "Are you kidding? I was half asleep and annoyed. I just reacted without thinking. If I'd known it would turn into a whole thing, I probably would have been more diplomatic." "So this was all an accident?" "Completely an accident." Vorn stared at her, then at his datapad, then back at her. "You accidentally started first contact protocols, accidentally proved humanity's combat capability, accidentally secured favorable trade agreements, and accidentally became a diplomatic representative, all by accident. When you put it that way, it sounds impressive. It is impressive, terrifyingly impressive, which is exactly why the classification of battlefield variable is so appropriate. Humans can be dangerous even when they don't mean to be." Vorn made a final note on his datapad. "I'm adding an addendum to my report. Human threat assessment increases proportionally with caffeine consumption and decreases with adequate food and rest. Future diplomatic encounters should account for this." "That's actually pretty smart," Jess admitted. "I've had 3 days to think about nothing but human unpredictability. I've learned to identify the warning signs." Vorn's feathers settled into something approaching contentment. "Lieutenant Keller, despite the chaos you've caused, it's been educational working with you." "Same. I learned a lot about galactic politics. And I learned that humans are exhausting, creative, and persistently friendly, even when being tested for military threat assessment. It's been an experience." They shook hands, or rather, Jess shook his wing, which was apparently the appropriate gesture. As Vorn walked away, Jess heard him muttering into his datapad, "Note for future assessments. Humans consider formal military evaluation an acceptable context for making jokes. This species cannot be intimidated through standard protocols." The diplomatic mission departed 3 hours later. As their ship pulled away from the station, Jess looked out at the galaxy sprawling before them, full of species they'd barely met and challenges they'd barely imagined. Earth had just been classified as a battlefield variable. Humanity's official threat level was don't. And somehow they'd made friends anyway. Because that's what humans did. They figured it out. They adapted. They persisted. And they brought snacks. Jess smiled, pulled out the protein bar she'd been given during the assessment, read the ingredients one more time, and threw it in the recycling chute. Some things weren't worth the effort. But everything else was just a matter of being stubborn enough to make it work. The galaxy wasn't ready for humanity, but humanity showed up anyway, with coffee and questionable singing and an absolute refusal to quit. And honestly, that was the most human thing of all.